Alrighty, folks, we've got a bunch of fantastic attendees in here and a lot of cool stuff to talk about today. Um, well, hello. Welcome to this finally the second event for Friends of Figma Iconography. Hope that you all and yours are healthy and doing well. My name is Noah Jacobus. I am the community advocate for Figma, focusing on this area of interest and the craft and love that goes into icons of all kinds. Um, if you want to keep up with what we're doing and tune in for future events, join the chapter at friends.figma.com. We keep updates there as well as past events and videos and stuff like that. Easy to check up on. And also follow us on Twitter at FOF_icons. I occasionally will retweet non event related things there as they crop up. And you can, of course, hop into the Friends of Figma Slacks and Discord, where we can talk about all manner of things related to Figma, not just icons. We talk about, tips and tricks and troubleshooting, design education, accessibility, design systems. You can even find local chapters of Friends of Figma for your city or country or other interest groups. And a few other quick reminders before we really get cracking into this. This event is being recorded. It'll be available later on the Friends of Figma Iconography YouTube channel. Fingers crossed this time I'm going to figure out how to do subtitling and chapter markers. So hopefully better than last time. If you have any questions for Jory as we go along, there is a Q&A tab over in the chat. So feel free to put your questions in there and then it'll collect them all up for us and we can revisit them at the end. Feel free to use the chat in the meantime to talk with fellow attendees. And of course, be excellent to each other. All our events, we abide by Figma's code of conduct, which you can take a closer look at that URL right there. So without further ado, I would love to introduce the man of the hour, Jory Raphael. Jory is a designer, he's an illustrator, an occasional actor. He's also the lead icon designer at Font Awesome, the creator of Symbolicons. His work's been used by a ton of amazing companies over the years, including Apple, Pepsi, Sesame Street, you name it. He's also the author and designer of this excellent little visual riddle book, Goes Without Saying, which is a real treat. So you can and should follow him at all of these places. Twitter at Sensible World, Symbolicons, and then as well as his day job at Font Awesome, which is what we'll be talking about today. So welcome, Jory.
Hi, Noah. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing?
I am doing well. I took a bunch of notes that I was going to say, and I wrote them out, and they were really messy. And so I was like, I'm going to write them again, but cleaner. And then they ended up messier. So I don't know if that's going to work so well. But so, hi, everybody. I have the distinct pleasure of getting to draw icons all day long. So thank you to Font Awesome for that, and the fine folks there. Yeah, because it's very fun. And this, I wanted this. Noah reached out to me because I wrote a blog post, which is on the Font Awesome blog, about us just switching our icon design flow into Figma after having been in Illustrator for years and years and years and years and years. And kind of wanted to talk about why we made the switch and walk you through my process a little bit for folks who might be interested in doing the same. And Noah, you are here and can talk to me and can ask any questions you want along the way. And I'm probably going to, say some wrong things about Figma that you can correct me on. I'm certainly going to name the tools wrong, I'm sure. But I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. With this nice inception going on.
Figception, I think we'll call it.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. And I'm not going to do a full screen thing. I'm just, I bumped up my resolution. So hopefully things are readable for folks on smaller screens. But I want to start out by saying that the initial push to go into Figma really started because we moved to Figma for our general design process as a whole at Font Awesome, in kind of prep for designing version 6 of Font Awesome, which is in beta right now. And we actually just released the second beta, which is also available for free users and pro users. So this whole website here was initially designed and iterated on in Figma. And during that process, I started doing a little bit of research and playing around with designing icons as well in Figma, and really, egged on, I should say, and supported by folks like Noah and Bonnie Kate Wolf, learned a bit more about it and just dove in headfirst. And so this whole site was designed in Figma, and then the icons themselves, not yet, but for the ones up here, some of them are, but we're working hard on getting all the new ones. Certainly are, and yeah, going forward we'll be designing all of them there. So I put together a little Figma file about how we made the change. And so the biggest thing I can say about Figma and why I decided to make the change can be said in this list I created, and it's one item long, and that's because it's easier. And I was telling this to Noah, but I created a whole long list of different reasons I liked working in Figma over previous programs I worked in, and it ultimately comes down to it just being easier to do a whole bunch of things. So for starters, like everything that I'm working on is in one place. It's in Figma, and what I thought was initially going to be a detriment, it being a browser-based program, has actually not been an issue for me at all. And in fact, it's I do use the Mac app, but what's wonderful is that I can go on anyone's computer if I'm out and about and log into my Figma account and have everything there. And I don't have to install any new software. I don't have to, do X, Y, Z. So it's wonderful. And I also recently found out that I can, using mobile Safari on an iPad, I can actually still use Figma with, a few caveats, but I've been designing some icons on my iPad as well. And then there's, some smaller things like, not smaller, but collaboration, because other people in the company can kind of peek in on what I'm doing and offer suggestions or see progress, or we can, when we're designing products, not just icons, we can rebound off of each other's designs and all kind of be in one place. There's commenting up here, and you can see that Noah and I have been leaving some very important comments about this particular slide. And so then there are all sorts of other reasons, but I'm going to probably bring those up as I go through the next steps. So I thought it would be helpful, if it makes sense, to maybe show you what my old way of doing things was, so that it provides a little context. And maybe if you are someone who uses Illustrator or other design programs, there may be some similarities there, and I can talk through what my pain points were with those programs, and why I made the switch. I want to also just state up front that, like, I find Illustrator to be an amazing program. I know, like, Affinity Designer is an amazing program, Sketch is an amazing program. They're all these great programs, and they all work well for different people for different reasons. I designed in Illustrator for well over a decade, and there's lots to love about it. But it feels like, to me, Figma in some ways was designed for icon designers. It's certainly getting to be there as we move forward. So instead of, actually, I have all these slides that I put together, screenshots, but instead of the screenshots, I think I'm actually just going to show you Illustrator itself. So our old structure was, I lied, I'm gonna go back for a second. Our old structure was, I had a kind of a main Illustrator file for these kind of larger category groupings of all the icons in Font Awesome. And we have thousands of icons. They're in a bunch of different styles. And so I needed a way where I could kind of go into a subgenre and add new icons or refine things without everything else getting in the way. So I created all these Illustrator files, and then within those Illustrator files, I have an artboard structure. So each of these are some of our smiley icons, and they are all in the same file. They all live on individual artboards. These artboards are all named with the icon names themselves. And then the structure I actually started working with was having each style on its own layer. And that kind of allowed me to keep them linked if I ever needed to move something around. So like I can, move that icon around and it stays connected to the other styles. And then ultimately I would take these icons, and it takes a lot to get back, take these icons and export them all as SVGs. And that SVG was kind of the source of truth that we used at Font Awesome to upload into our build system and build our typefaces and kind of spread out to the wild and use in all of our various different ways. And it's a process that we kind of refined and worked with for a while. But the main issue I was finding with it is that organization in Illustrator, at least the way I did it with this artboard structure, is kind of clunky. And by that, I mean, you can select an artboard and move it around. You can select a couple of artboards and move them around, but these two artboards, doing things with them is tricky. Like you can align them if you want, but there's just something that's a little hinky about living in this world where I don't know. I don't know the best way to describe that. It's just it's a little clunky to me. And when I moved over, when I moved over to the frame system in Figma, it felt even more hard to use. So so our process to that was what we did. That was like simple. We designed the icons. I put them on different layers. I'd export them as an SVG, and then we'd be off to the races. Now, the process we took to move over to Figma meant that I needed to get all of this current content from Illustrator into Figma. And in a lot of ways, Figma, I don't know if this is true or not, but it feels to me like SVG is a very native language with Figma itself. So it treats them well as first-class citizens. So what I ended up doing was I exported all of them as SVGs. And if you can see, Noah, can you see my full desktop here?
I see the Figma window on top.
Just the Figma?
Yeah.
Do you see my desktop itself with the little folders on the side now?
Yes, yes, I do see the folders.
Okay. So I'm going to show you how we did it, because I found it kind of fun and satisfying, which is you just basically export these SVGs and you take them all, you select them all, and you just drag them into Figma. And it says the little +100 there, and they're there. And they've got their names, they've got the vector path. They're kind of nicely arranged. I mean, they're a little tight, but they're all here. And then you can take them all. And Figma has this awesome padding feature that you can kind of squeeze in and out manually if you want. Or you can go in here and actually type in actual, offsets and stuff, and they are treated that way. And because we at Font Awesome have a bunch of different styles of icons, the icon itself kind of has the SVG has the same name depending on, regardless of the style. So what I went ahead and did is with these frames selected, and this is another reason I really like Figma, is that it's super easy to interact with all this stuff and drag them around and move them. But with these all selected, I just hit Command R and it brought up the native renaming feature, and I could just I added in the style name and then the current name. And these are now style-based names. And so I can do the same with our light icons and bring those in, which is what I already did over here. So these are all light / solid /. And with those specific naming there, it means that I can then in Figma also come in here and be like, all right, I just want to select the light icons on this page. With a plugin that I use, you can just select them all. And there's a plugin that select layers, and you can select by name, you can select by type, you can do all sorts of things. But if I select by name and I say, let's just select any icon that has the name light / in it, it's going to just select these icons, and I can grab them all and move them around, or I can go in and quickly change all of their colors. So that's kind of how we did it. That's the long and the short of like saying all these icons lived in Illustrator. I took them out as SVGs, and then I brought them back into Figma, and they've been living here now. This is kind of now their source of truth. And then we've been taking the extra step of kind of slowly going through each icon and actually redrawing it in Figma. And that's allowed us to do some icon refinement in the process, but also give us a new source of truth that is still editable. And I can go into that in just a second.
Plus, you get to revisit any little nitpicky things that may have been like bothering you from the past, right? A little bit.
I mean, like thousands of little
nitpicks.
Yeah. You design an icon and I immediately want to redesign it.
The iconographer's burden, 100%.
Right, exactly. I want to, for anyone who's maybe interested in doing this step, I want to mention one quick thing, and that is that when you're exporting an SVG from Illustrator, my preferred way to do it is not using Illustrator's built-in export for screens feature, because let me bring this up. File. I'm even forgetting where it lives. There we go. Export for screens. So export for screens is this built-in feature of Illustrator that lets you select the artboards you want to export, which in and of itself is got a little frustrating for me when I have these big files with tons and tons of icons, because if I made a change to like 2 icons, I'd have to deselect all of these icons, scan through, find like these 2, and export them. But the reason I suggest not using this method is because an SVG exported using it will be redrawn in the process. So if you've taken pains to make your icon kind of fit, like this icon has a minimum number of points here, little vector nodes. When you do the export for screens feature, it's going to redraw those to kind of simplify them, and it doesn't always work out well. So for example, I'm going to try and find the one. So this is using export for screens. All these icons over here are ones I use that process for. But when you like zoom into this icon here, like this light icon, you'll notice that the icon itself suddenly grew a little bit in size. The paths are suddenly kind of all over the place. There are the nodes, instead of being, this was originally a circle that had a node at the bottom and on each side. Yeah. And it's kind of redrawn them. And this, I find this is particularly the case when you have stroked icons where there's an inside and outside shape, and Illustrator's kind of figuring out how to do those cleanly. But I mean, just look at these eyes. Like, look at how many nodes are on those eyes. That is kind of crazy.
It's ridiculous.
So it's doing an interpretation there on export. So the method I have been using is actually saving as, or saving as a copy. Either of those work, but I'll save as. I will choose the format as SVG. I'll hit use the artboards, and you can do them all, or you can do a range. You can do like 3 and 5 or whatever. And what this does is essentially just keeps all of the path data consistent. And so when you bring those into Figma or any other program, quite frankly, it still, oops, wrong side. It still remains super clean. Let me get over here. So that's a whole lot fewer points. The icon itself is still nice and clean. So that's my suggestion if you're going to pulling things in from Illustrator to Figma to use the save as for exporting. So now that everything we had is now in Figma, there are a couple things that I find incredibly cool. I can quickly show you, like, this is an example of one of our files in Figma that has all the icons imported and we've redrawn them. So I've got all these like cars and, you know, sea and air vehicles and planes and stuff like that. And we've gone in, and these now are all still editable, and you can kind of go in and change stuff about them, which is super cool. Which is kind of if there was any feature in Figma that sold me on it and has me not able to think about any other program, it's the Boolean groups. And that is, so Boolean groups are, I tried not to reiterate stuff, Noah, that you did in your first presentation here, but you know, the simplest way to explain it is it's ways that two shapes interact with each other. So I've got these two squares, and up here, those are Boolean operations, and you can join them, you can subtract them, you can intersect, do these four different things. And what happens is, like, I subtracted the top shape from the bottom one, and this right here, if you can see with what's outlined here in the blue, this, for all intents and purposes, is acting as a compound path. So if I were to export this thing called subtract right here, it would be just the path outlining this shape here. But Figma keeps them editable. So this is still a group that has these two rectangles. They still exist independently of each other. You can grab one, you can move it around, the outer shape, remains the same, and then you can still export it. And the reason this is so helpful in icon design is that, we're often trying things out, and when you have a bunch of different icons and you're testing things out, you don't want to kind of lock things in. You don't want to have to go and say, like, I want to flatten this, make it a compound shape. Because then once you do that, you're kind of stuck. And if you want to make any changes, you have to go back and do it again. And it's a pain in the butt. And if any minor change, like if I decided that I wanted these legs to be slightly thinner, slightly thicker, I'd have to redraw the whole icon. And you can't, like in a program like Illustrator, you can't achieve the effects you want to achieve on certain effects until you've actually flattened things together. So in the case of this alarm clock here, this is a Boolean group that I've done a bunch of things to. So I've gone in and I have these legs, which you can see here in this little preview, look like they are these two angled pill shapes, but they are in fact still strokes. So I can still go in here, and I've enlarged this. So, this is not an actual, I don't usually draw icons this large, but I've have this 40 pixel, stroke on it. And if I double that, it gets a bit chunkier. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that. But you can see here when I have the Boolean group selected, it's still a shape that is movable and exportable as this bigger thing. And you can't do that. You can't do things like subtracting in Illustrator and then applying these other effects. So the way this is built is I have these legs, which I have taken these two stroke paths. I've done a union operation together, so they are now treated as this one unit. I've taken the body of the clock and then the stroke for a hand, and I use a subtract Boolean operation to reverse this out, which means that when I pull this over, you can see through it. And that's what my final effect, that's what I want the actual end icon to actually do. And so the beauty here is I'm actually, as you're building the icon, you are previewing what the end result is going to be in the process. And that allows you to do all sorts of things, like be like, oh, actually it looks better if we have, the clock hands like that, or, or the angle of these bells isn't quite right. I want to change that. So you can do all sorts of things and then still have this editable thing. And part of this that helped me with the switch to Figma was switching my mental model to support kind of this layer structure, because so in Illustrator, when you have a shape selected, good luck finding it in the layers palette. Because it's there, but you kind of, okay, this is the one. You can see it's green. Okay, I'm going to select this layer. I'm going to select this layer here. I want to move this. Wait, why is it not moving? I have to click on it first. Selecting this layer does not really nothing. It only kind of deals with the content in the layer panel instead of the content on the artboard and in the canvas itself. You have to instead click on this little nubbin over here to focus and select that. The layers panel in Figma kind of behaves the exact same way as the canvas itself. So I can select the alarm clock here. I could delete it. It's gone. If I select the alarm clock on the artboard itself or on the frame itself and delete it, it's gone. It's like the same thing. And so I know that each piece of this icon also exists in the layers palette and can be selected there if I want to. The other piece that's super helpful, which I put these little, stole this kind of style from you, Noah, in your last presentation, but I put these little cheats here, which is if you hold down the command key or I guess control on Windows, it's kind of a focus mode. So anything your cursor browses over, it selects. So you can see it selecting this subtracted shape that I used for the bells, or it's selecting the individual legs, which is a really quick way to kind of go in and grab something. In Illustrator, I'd hit A, which brought up the direct select tool, and you can kind of select individual nodes that way. If I have A, it's like clicking on those ones, I can grab that there. Which is something I used all the time, and it was so ingrained in me that I had to really kind of fight against it when I moved to Figma, because I was like, I really want to grab, how do I grab this leg right here? I don't know how. So that focus is really helpful because that's one way to do it. And then the other piece of it is if you hit return or enter, it goes into this vector editing mode, which immediately brings up the selectable nodes, which you can grab. And you hit escape, and you're in your escape a couple times, you're out of it again. So like I constantly am kind of doing that. You can also double click to get into a shape and kind of drill down each level. So, and then, yeah, so that's that. That's kind of what's wonderful about Boolean groups and shapes. And that's the biggest reason I switched is right there, is because these remain editable and I can go in and change all sorts of things without actually having to undo a lot of steps. So that's my biggest thing. That's if there's one thing you take away, it's like these Boolean groups are so nice. They're non-destructive. It lets you kind of preview the final icon. I love them so much. Don't you agree, Noah?
Oh yes.
Do you love them so much?
Yeah, I agree. Like that wasn't something that I really figured out right away when I first tried designing. Like the first thing that really grabbed me about, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but the first thing that grabbed me about icon tools in Figma were the vector networks, and the Boolean, the power of the Boolean stuff and being able to deal with that didn't hit me until later. But as evidenced by some recent experiments that I actually tweeted about recently with some icons I was making. Yeah, it makes a fantastic end product, but you can have so much jank in there with your Booleans, but it makes it so beautiful and still editable.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
And for those wondering, so Noah said vector networks. The vector, and I might get this wrong, but a vector network in Figma is kind of this unique feature that takes multiple vectors and treats them as one, more or less. So you can have you could have this big old line here. Let's bring it up. And you can draw another piece onto it. So this node here is movable now, which is cool because it kind of treats it as a single object versus two distinct, the way I used to do it is you'd have an extra, let me get out of that group, but you'd have an extra stroke here and you kind of line them up and get them in there and you make all these changes and you're like, oh crap, it doesn't quite line up again, or I have to move that or whatnot. So having them be kind of one unit is pretty cool. Okay, so Boolean groups are a big reason we switched because they're great. And it also helped. I know I'm saying that a lot. I'm super refined with my language here. I apologize. They're really good, or they're so good. They also help when designing other styles of icons. So, so the biggest thing. Let me say this right now because I forgot to say this. This is all the other big selling point, and I think this is what I was able to sell to the team to get us to switch, was that strokes remain editable and you can subtract them from other shapes. So in the case of this stroke right here, like the hands on this clock, in Illustrator, the only way to get the effect where it is punched out of the backing shape would be to first outline that stroke and then do the subtract feature. But Figma treats this stroke both as a stroke line that you can change the weights of, but also as the outer bounds of it. So you can take this stroke and punch it out of this body, which is huge, because as I was saying before, you can then change the style of it. You could change, like, if I want this stroke to have a square end or have a, sharp corner point there, you can, and that would be really hard to do in other programs. So that's the other big reason I love it. And then, okay, so I'll move on to frames. I mentioned these kind of briefly when I was talking about our SVG import process, but frames are kind of like artboards in Illustrator, but they're also kind of their own thing. And they are so this little slide here itself is a frame that is movable, but then each of these icons within it is also a frame, and these are also movable, and they're kind of independent of each other while being tied to one another. And you can select all the icons themselves, like I said before, and change their spacing if you want. But it's just really a pleasure to use and move things around. And so that's just a very simple thing that I put in there, and that's all I have to say about that. So they're nice. Frames are nice. Components are like frames that are super powered. And they, in the case of this right here, so in icon design, the reason I find that really helpful is you can take an icon and create variants of it, or different versions of it, I should say, because variants is a different term in Figma. But you can create different versions of it while retaining the main icon itself. So in the case of this icon here, we've got a car, and I want to create a taxi cab, and then I want to create a version of the car that has windows. And you can do that by taking this. I've made it a component. And the way you do that is, like, I'll draw a little shape here. There's this little diamond, 4-diamond thing up here to create a component, and that'll make a reusable element essentially. So in the case of the car, I've created this car component, and then I've gone in and created a taxi component, which is just another frame that has this car right here, which is this main component. It's like an instance of this component. And then I've added the little sign at the top. So if I go in and change anything about this main car, like let's say I want the wheels to be more rounded, you can see it is immediately happens on each component. So this is, or each instance of that component. So when you are creating a series of icons that have a similar core element, you can create a component of that element and then kind of make design changes or updates down the line if you need to, and it'll cascade across all of those instances, which is pretty cool. So, like, you can go in and make the headlight bigger or smaller, or move its position or whatnot. And it, I don't use this for every icon, but for icons that I'm finding I'm reusing over and over again, it's helpful to have versions of them that you can kind of create, like the base model of.
And something I might mention real quick along with that is a cool thing you can do is you can make components and instances of components and unite them in a Boolean as well, and have things like colors and effects applied to that. So yeah, Booleans aren't just restricted to like your run-of-the-mill shapes or paths or whatever. You can
Right.
combine instances into Booleans and subtract and unite and do all that same kind of stuff too, which is really handy.
Right. So for instance, this car, these are two separate shapes right now. I could take both of those shapes and I could unite them. And then suddenly this union is a vector path. It's a compound path right there.
Right.
Which is sweet. And you can, like you said, you can do that with two separate, unique components as well.
Yep.
So that's super cool. And I like that. That's another thing I like. Another thing I like about Figma and icons is the icon. You can design the icon in Figma, and then you can use it elsewhere in Figma for presentation purposes, or in designs without, while keeping the core icon itself intact elsewhere. So in the case of these icons right here, like I pulled these icons. Sorry, I don't have the right thing focused. I pulled these icons in from a different place. These icons are all instances. I can take these instances and I can change their color. I can do whatever I want with them, which is cool in and of itself. But so you can like create, if you're sharing something or you're doing a design process and you have different drafts to share, you can have a page in Figma or a file in Figma with a bunch of layouts like this that you are sharing, and then that's not the core icon. So like if I want to actually go back in and change something about this icon, I can do it later. The icon is just it's just like a reflection of it right here. So over here on the right-hand side, this is going to jump me to the icon itself. And it brought me to an entirely different file in Figma. And this is the icon itself. And you can see like it actually has a different color on it right now, but I can go in and I can, like I said, make that bigger and it'll get reflected across to here, which is really cool. And makes it super helpful for kind of separating out your like production files from your presentation files. So for instance, like here are some icons we're working on right now that have all the icons themselves live here. Like this is in this file. It's, I find this beautiful, but it's not, it's kind of just a bunch of different things. But it's all of our icons and it's got them in different styles. And kind of this is all the same icon in different styles. But when I'm not going to share this as a screenshot with someone, I'm going to go to this presentation and I'm going to share like an actual, maybe add a name to it. You can export this as a PNG or whatever you want, which is super cool and helpful, kind of keeping those things a little separate. Whereas, you could easily get lost and like have 12 different versions of the same icon that you can't, find what is the source of truth.
Right.
So,
And much harder to modify something by mistake if they're kept separate too.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing that I have absolutely been loving, this is especially helpful when you're designing a large icon set like we have at Font Awesome, because you're going to come across icons or elements that are you reuse a lot. So an example of these little icon modifiers here. So like the little circle and the plus, the exclamation point, this little fire, the slash. These are things that we use all the time, and there are a ton of icons that have them. In my old world, using a program like Illustrator, I would design this icon with the little circle plus. I would get it how I like it. I'd copy it, and I'd paste it, over by a new icon. I'd subtract out the shape. I'd create the new icon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, someone would come and tell me like, oh, hey, Jory, did you know that, that's not actually centered, or, one of the strokes is a different weight than the other one? And I'd be like, oh, oops. And I'd have to go and hunt down every single icon and copy and paste and fix them all. And it was a royal pain in the butt. And I don't have to do that anymore, which is very nice for me. So what we have actually done at Font Awesome is created what we call kind of a source icon modifiers file. So each of these elements here are changeable. So this circle and plus is a unique component that has a bunch of variants with it. So this, for starters, it's a component in and of itself, so that if I were to use this on a different icon and then change the source one, it would update there. But because we have a bunch of different styles of icons, we can go in and have variants. So this is all the same source component, but has different details about it. We're building a bunch of sharp icons, so I have variants that are sharp instead of the rounded ones that we're using. And this also means that I can go in and be like, okay, I'm going to actually take this one. I'm going to move this icon out of the way and say, I've got this icon right here, and I want to change this. So this is currently it's the plus. I'm going to go in and I have all these different modifiers that we've already built, and I'm going to turn it into a check mark, and it's done. And classic, I can do anything I want with it. So these are elements that you can change and kind of easily apply on top of other things. And you'll notice in the case of these icons, I haven't combined them yet because I wanted them to have the two-tone look, but I could take the crab shape here and this circle check here, and I could make them into a union. So now they are being treated as a single compound shape. And what this is it's a crab component here, which is actually these little guys down here. And so I could actually go in and say, hey, just like that car, if I'm going to be using it a lot, maybe I need to create a few versions of this. So I've got a light version of the crab here, or I've got a super thin version. I'm like, oh, if I'm using a thin version, I need to use the thin version of the modifier. So this is a component, the little modifier circle. I also have a component of the cutout shape. And then I have the icon itself. And that becomes helpful because when you have things like this crab here and you change the style of it, all of our styles of icons have slightly different rules when it comes to adding that slash element. So our thin style has kind of a wider margin on each side of it, and you can change this one to thin as well. So that's how that one looks there. So that makes it super helpful and easy to kind of cascade reusable elements throughout all of your icon library. And we have over here this single file that has all these different modifiers that I've built with the icon variants that I keep adding to every time as we're rebuilding the icons. Every time I come across an element that I'm going to be using more than once, I will build this out. And you can see here, each of these, I've got, let me grab into the layers file over here. You kind of name them based on their different elements. So the family is classic, the style is solid, and it gets represented up over here in the variants thing, and then those become selectable items when you bring those into another place in your design. Mm-hmm. And then I built this little thing here, because another fun thing with variants is that you can have different versions, like the crab where you have the different styles. Here you can say, like, I want this mushroom instead. Oh, that one I might have built wrong. I built these wrong because it's going to shrink if I restore it. It is. Anyway, let me go back to where I was. Anywho, you can kind of change things here. That's all I'm saying. Where you think this is super one-up. That was supposed to be much more impressive, and I think I copied something to a different file and I messed things up, so I apologize.
Hey, it's all good.
And then one final thing is you can have kind of components that are based on other types of things. So at Font Awesome, we have OTF files for all of our icons using ligatures. So we have this component here that has that you can change the style of. Not do done. You can change the style of. You can add padding to it. You can change the size of it. But then you can just come in here and type out, different icon names, and it gets, it uses the ligatures feature in our icon.
Wow.
To swap it out. So I find myself using that a lot. So that's fun. So we use that.
That's wild.
Yeah. How are we doing on time, Noah?
We are doing really well. We do have time. I mean, I don't know how you're feeling. We do have time for questions, or if there's anything else that you would love to run through.
I've got one more thing I can mention, which is
just like an Apple event.
Yeah, this one's not nearly as exciting, but I'll do my best. So as I said, the cool thing about these Boolean groups is that they are compound shapes, essentially. And you can take these icons and you can export a SVG directly from it, and it'll treat it like it is its own element. But there's an issue that I stumbled across when we were testing everything out in Figma to see if it would work for us. And that is that by default, when you export something from Figma, it relies on this thing called an even odd fill rule. And essentially what that is I think you should have it up in code. So when you export this SVG, this original, this alarm clock original, this is this top one right here. You see this fill rule, even odd?
Mm-hmm.
That is a way of showing how vector paths overlap and kind of which directions the paths go in. And it is, in some ways, it's the easiest way to represent SVG, because it basically is saying, like, you have two, when you have overlapping shapes, you kind of cut one out of the other one, even odd. I'm vastly simplifying it and probably getting it wrong, but I can show you if, like, you select this alarm clock icon, which I've flattened here, and use, there's a plugin here called not Frame Recessor. I want to use a plugin called Fill Rule Editor. So this is a good example of it. So this icon, by default, Figma does two things. It takes this shape, which has a cutout, and makes it into an even odd fill rule. And then it takes kind of these singular elements and calls them non-zero fill rules. And what happens is, if you strip out that fill rule, your icon is going to look weird in some cases. So if I were to change this fill rule to non-zero, I'll say that at Font Awesome, we need to use non-zero fill rules for now. We're hoping to kind of fix it down the line, but because it's kind of required when you're building a typeface, because it wants the simplest version of a path you can give it. And if you're adding all these rules on top of it, you can run into some problems. So if this were non-zero, what's going to happen is this icon is going to have the shape on top of it, and you're not really going to know what, suddenly the detail of it is gone. Mm-hmm. So that is a slight issue when exporting from Figma. You can go in and you could take each of these icons, you can manually flatten the Boolean shapes by doing Command E, but that's a pain in the butt. Because you can manually flatten them, and you can go in here and then kind of manually edit these, which is basically saying, like, I've got this stroke here that I actually want this one to go in the other direction. I want this to be a non-zero, and I want this to go in the other direction. So that right there would get me, if I exported that would not have a fill rule. It would just be blank, which would be great. But you have to kind of manually go into each icon and deal with it. We're in the process of building at Font Awesome a plugin that will simplify that, hopefully. So you can take these icons, you run it through our little plugin, this flattener, and it magically takes all this stuff, flattens them, and tells it what direction to make those fills. So if I take this same alarm clock icon, show you that fill rule editor, it's automatically already doing that, wow, which is kind of what we want. So that is a caveat when exporting these shapes, these icons. And if you're dealing with a small amount of icons or a handful, it's not really a huge deal, because you can kind of manually do that. But if you like us, have a huge library, it's pretty cumbersome. So we're hoping to kind of release that soon so folks can use that. And then one other thing I'll just mention about exporting icons is, even though strokes are still intact in these Boolean groups, when you export it, it's going to treat it like a compound shape. So it's going to, expand, outline all of those strokes for you. Mm-hmm. If you have an icon that you want those strokes to remain intact, you're going to want to take it first and kind of ungroup everything. So in the case of this, all I did was, this used to be a Boolean shape. Like I can select them all and go up here and join them. So it was this, and all I did was just ungrouped it. It broke things out. Now when I export this, you'll see it's all these different layers. it'll treat these two bells as compound shapes or as paths, but then all the vectors, the circle with the inner stroke, these strokes and the legs will still be editable SVG stroke paths. So so if that's the kind of icon you're building for which a lot of people do, and there's lots of great reasons for it, you're going to want to expand or ungroup your Boolean groups before you export them to kind of get that feature in there. So yeah, that's all I got. I like
that
Figma.
Is fantastic. And I've already seen some questions, people asking about like, hey, is this plugin? Is that a plugin? Is that going to be available?
Oh,
so
yes,
I think the people are excited.
Yes, the goal is to make that available. We've got a couple tiny rough edges that we need to smooth out before we release it. But I will say that I've been using it for my stuff already, and it's been a huge time saver. So I got to give a lot of props to Rob on our team for building that. So woo!
Excellent. Yeah, let's hop into. I think let me pull up my Q&A tab here. See what the people are asking about. Let's see. I'll just start at the top. Maria wanted to know, I've found that the formatting behind the SVGs is not that clean on Figma. Any idea why this occurs? Well, I think we've actually addressed that a little bit, potentially. Why that occurs, any trick to manage cleaner code to animate after with CSS, potentially?
Yeah, so that would be, you'd want to ungroup them, I think, because if you're going to be animating, you need them to have them as separate elements. And certainly for the strokes, if you're going to animate the strokes, you need to have those as their own thing. So cool. That would be my suggestion.
I am not as familiar with that sort of thing, so I'm glad you're here to answer that. As far as code implementation stuff goes. Dave asks, how much time do you think you save now developing icons? Where do you see that savings the most?
So that's my boss. So he's asking the tough questions here. Dave, it saves us so much time and so much money, and it's completely worth it. So it saves
the
a lot
charts
of time.
Are going up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that the designing the alternate styles saves a ton of time. And Dave, actually, I see you wrote down a little bit lower saying, are those sharp font awesome icons? Yes, they are sharp font awesome icons. And Bonnie Kate Wolf is actually helping me with some of those. And we're finding that like once you build our core icon, making them sharp is like so easy in Figma. It's so nice because you can just change the endpoints. You can, unround the corners. And so, yeah, it's a lot quicker, I think, in my experience. What's taking a long time is redrawing the icons that I've drawn in the past. But that's another topic.
I mean, I'm just going to say it's totally worth it just for the otter alone, because that new otter is just...
Oh, yes, thank you.
It's so good.
Thank you.
Cool. Tyler, it's a good rule of thumb for stroke / outline width. From Illustrator, it looked like you had some actions for set sizes. How has that changed for you in Figma?
Well, so we have, at Font Awesome, we've got currently 5 different icon styles, and each of those styles kind of has their own internal rules for how the strokes are sized. So I know if I'm designing a light icon, the stroke's going to be 1 pixel because I'm designing them at 16 pixels. So if I'm designing a regular icon, it's going to be 1.5. And if I'm designing a thin icon, it's going to be half a pixel. So that's kind of built in. A lot of the stuff you saw in Figma or in Illustrator, all those kind of actions that I had built for myself were really to save myself time or be able to select a bunch of things at once and to mass apply it. Selecting a lot of things in Figma at once is so much easier because you can kind of target something by its name. You can target something by if it's a component or not. You can target it by its color using plugins. I should add. So yeah, I found that a lot easier in Figma.
Excellent. Joey wants to know, we use material icons in the product I designed, but sometimes we have to modify them. This has led to developers using multiple different methods for placing icons. Any advice on how to keep icon libraries in sync between design and development?
That might be a better question for you. I mean, because I live in the same world, you know, as my developers do. So the icons they're using are the ones I've designed. So we can be pretty targeted with our systems. When you're dealing with clients or you're dealing with bringing in a bunch of icon libraries, that's tricky. Yeah, I don't know that I have great advice for that one.
Yeah, that can be tough depending on depending on the organization, also the implementation. What we typically do at MedLab, where I work, where we are on a project where we're also doing development, is to pretty early on set up some sort of it's not a full design system because it isn't code related, but it is, a light design system or a UI kit of sorts. It's kind of a source of truth for the Figma project as a whole, and use that as kind of, even starting out when we're starting the early design stages, of keeping componentizing placeholders sometimes within that, so that then any changes down the line cascade into the design, using components and instances and stuff like that. It isn't, fully fledged design system in that, nothing has a token and there isn't any sort of like an update or alert system for when something has changed. In regards to that, but we have found some success with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, Joey, I'll also say, and I'd kind of be remiss to not mention that. I mean, it really depends on how you're integrating the icons ultimately into the projects, like how if you're just dropping plain old SVGs in, or if you're using some sort of service. I will say that we have, and this is a little plug, but at Font Awesome, like we have a bunch of icons. They have a certain design style. Like, I'm proud of a lot of them. They're really cool. I think they work in a lot of situations. But we also have an icon upload service that allows you to take any icons and upload them and use our technology to serve them up, without using our icons if you don't want to. So if you have an icon library with disparate pieces all over the place, you could take all those icons and upload them into Font Awesome, and then use our kit embed codes to deliver up the icons if it works for your process. So
Gilson actually, in the chat and the Q&A, actually just referenced this too, talking about the Figma API is fantastic for this, for being able to build your own solutions for this kind of thing too, and that they use the API to get icons from Figma and generate SVGs automatically and stuff like that too. So
that's actually something we're going to be in the future looking into too, so that I can design something in Figma and then just pump it out to our our database and stuff, which will be great. So we don't have to download them, export them, download them, upload them, and it kind of all happens behind the scenes. So.
This timing is perfect. I think there's only one question left in the Q&A, but it's a great one to end on, I think. Maria wants to know, what books or documentation would you recommend for someone that's starting to work with icon creation?
Oh man, there are a bunch. So I'll say that at the end of Noah's last Friends of Figma talk, you put up some resources for some great articles about icon design on that last slide there. So I will second those. I've actually written a few articles. I'm hoping to write some more on the Font Awesome blog about kind of icon design basics, getting into a little bit of that. So I will promote those. I'm looking here at my bookshelf. This is a book. I don't know if it's available anywhere. I actually think he might be working on a new version of it currently, by John Hicks, which is the Icon Handbook, which is a fun book. It's a little, I wouldn't say outdated. It's from a little while ago, so it's there's some new technologies and stuff now, but the basics are all still very true. That's one. I would say another thing to do is just download some icons and play with them and see, and copy them and see how they were built and see if you can recreate them using your own, tools. That's, I think, copying is a way to grow your skills. And I've learned all sorts of techniques also from seeing how other people do things and be like, oh, why didn't I think of that? And yeah, just jump in, try it, I guess.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's how I got started too. Was back in the early material design days and just peeling icons apart and trying to make ones to match.
Yeah, I mean, I got started designing icons for signage, so I wasn't even dealing in pixels at that point. That was just like inches and things that would be cut out of vinyl and placed on wayfinding signs. So, yeah, there are lots of different ways to do it.
Awesome.
But I like doing it in Figma now, so it's very fun. I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jory, for all this fantastic information. Please throw some claps in the chat for Jory. I feel like I'm like a YouTube streamer now. Like and
Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe.
Yeah, hit that bell. But yeah, this is so much fantastic information, especially for people who are dealing with large systems and coming from Illustrator as well. So,
oh, good. I'm glad. I mean, I talked a lot, so I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's excellent. Yes, and so keep up to date with what Jory's up to and what Font Awesome is doing with the release of their new the new set once it's out of beta and everything else. And hopefully we'll have more info on our next event soon, and hopefully it won't be as long of a wait as the last one was. So that's what we're working on. So thanks everybody for coming, and have a good weekend.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.